All right. So in our first two content sections or topic sections, we talked about first-party data, collection, usage of it, and then measuring it. Now, these answer a lot of core challenges, especially in the analytics space, reporting, being able to then have insights to optimize. But a lot of the questions that folks are asking is, how do I target? How do I actually execute campaigns, media? How can I continue to maintain my return on ad spend, given the changes that are happening? And so our intention here is with the next two sessions to be able to introduce some ideas and some concepts to be able to help with that specifically. So in our first session, I would like to introduce my colleague, Roberto, to talk through a kind of a testing and a decision-making framework that can be applied for testing new solutions, new platforms, as well as to understand and really quantify the potential impact for current strategies and tactics. So with that, Roberto.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and welcome to the first targeting session and the targeting section of this afternoon. So the first thing, my name's Roberto Ruju. I lead our advertising platforms business at InfoTrust. And if there's two things I want you to take away from or to remember from the session is, as Lucas just alluded to, the first is a testing framework to really think about, and the second is a really cool video. So I know I'm setting the bar really high, particularly on the second one, but it is kind of the middle of the afternoon, so I'm going to be realistic about it. No, but seriously. So we've spoken a lot this morning, about what's going to go away with cookie deprecation, right? The ability to identify and target users at scale across different channels. And we spent the last 20 years piecing together a tapestry of amazing signals that stitch together just to allow us to do that. And we're just about to blow a big hole through that, right? So understandably, we're all concerned, so that goes away. And from the targeting point of view, what does that really mean? Well, it really is going to affect behavior-based targeting and and the identification, for interest-based targets as well to a certain degree. So, how am I going to maintain my my performance, in this new world? And we've seen this morning, and we'll continue to see lots of bits and pieces, amazing tactics, solutions, new approaches being thrown at us that could fill this hole. But the question then is, what's right for me, and how do I start piecing all of this together? And so the added complication here is that when we started speaking to some of our clients, they said, well, it's kind of a problem because our usual experts in this area aren't really always able to help us either, right? And so we, in fact, wanted to kind of invite a media agency on stage with us to kind of talk through how they're helping their clients through this. And I'm here on my own. So, and it's not a dig at anyone. It's just really hard. And when the actual expert who's led you through the journey so far isn't necessarily also fully, able to predict the future, that's kind of worrying. And so when our clients approached us and said, well, what can we do? We thought we need to kind of get inspiration maybe in a broader sense, maybe outside of our industry. And okay, so am I the only one who grew up thinking that Top Gun was like the best movie ever? Or is there anyone else in this room? Put your hands up. Okay. And I'm talking about the first first one, obviously, the first film. No, it's a really cool clip. You know, I do try and put one of these in every single one of my presentations. No, not really. It's actually really good. I should do that. I should try and do that from now on. You don't mind, Michael, right? But no, seriously, you know, what does digital advertising in 2024 have to do with, you know, a combat situation in a fighter jet, right? So the US Air Force has an acronym to describe the situation you just saw if you're a fighter in that cockpit. It's VUCA, and that stands for volatile. Things can change rapidly and suddenly. Uncertain, so we don't know everything. We don't have all the data. We don't know what's going to change. We don't know when it's going to change or how it's going to change. Complex. We are facing a problem that's not deterministic. We can't just, if we're experts, figure it out and predict it. There are too many moving pieces, and there are dynamics that are interrelated. So how I might do something, my opponent might react in a certain way, and I can't really just predict that, even if I'm an expert. And ambiguous. Even where I have information, I'm not entirely sure how to interpret it. If I'm in a fighter plane, I might have a cloud, and is that another enemy plane, or is that actually my wingman coming to help me? And, you know, that's not that different than what we're all experiencing in our industry right now. You know, things are changing. Sometimes we don't know the timelines. We don't know what else is going to change or when. And we can't just figure it out by, you know, talking to experts and knowing the inputs. And also, we have a lot of information today, and we're still not sure what to make of it, right? And so, you know, how do you kind of work through that? And again, a brilliant military strategist called Boyd. He was a brilliant engineer and mathematician. He developed a lot of theories, including the kind of engineering theory that led to the modern jet fighter plane. But he also came up with a framework called the OODA loop. And that stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. And the point here was to provide a way to use limited information, imperfect information, to get to, as quickly as possible, from the observe to the act. Because you don't have the time to figure everything out, even if you could figure it out. And the point of this is that even though it was developed, you know, in that kind of situation, it's actually really applicable and is widely adopted in a lot of other situations that are high stakes, such as litigation, such as emergency response, you know, medical or other, cyber warfare, and a lot of business contexts as well. And the point is that if you can move quickly, you can overcome even inherent disadvantages that you might have, even overwhelming disadvantages. Agility kind of, you know, can overcome raw power or brute force. And the key really is to not only shorten the path from observe to act, but also it's a loop. It's not a one-time thing. It's about really having the learnings, moving quickly, and then going through it again so that you're refining your approach. Okay, so we basically took this and thought, well, how can we adapt this? How can we think of this in the context, you know, again, with clients coming to us to actually then help navigate some of the things that we've been seeing today. And we've started to do this now with some of our clients. So, you know, if we think of this in a advertising context, so at the observe stage, we're really saying, okay, well, let me look across all of my media strategies today. What am I doing? and which ones are really most important to me in terms of the results I'm getting to fulfill my business objectives. Because you can't fix everything at once, and you can't test everything at once, so you've got to start somewhere, and so that helps you to prioritize. And then you start thinking, okay, which ones of these are going to be impacted the most? If I now think about which ones are most reliant on cookies or other things that are going away, and you really got to think broadly across all channels, across all tactics, across the whole funnel. And then you say, okay, well now, I know the ones I want to focus on, right, first. And so in the Orient phase, you start saying, well, okay, what are some potential solutions that could mitigate the things that I'm concerned about, right? I don't know if they're going to work or not, but which ones are most likely at this point that I might want to look at? And then you think about, okay, what do I need to do to be able to test those? And at that point, you suddenly realize that you're actually quite a way away from even, in some cases, that point, because there's a whole set of changes that you need to do even just to be able to test, for example. And so why not start that earlier rather than later when you suddenly realize that you need to create a strategy because it's gone away already. And then you think about, okay, what else do I have in terms of historic data across different platforms? Things have already happened. Safari's been deprecating cookies for a while, ITP on the mobile side. And so how far back can I go? You have a treasure trove of information that you can actually look at differentially as well without even thinking about testing forwards, which you can do as well, but even just looking back and benchmarking. So you need to understand all of that and what you can play with. And at that point, you say, okay, what actual tools exist? And that comes back to everything we've seen this morning, particularly the last couple of sessions. You can start saying, okay, well, that tool can fit into this strategy, which I might want to test. And then you understand what you actually need to build, if anything. And then what are you going to measure? Because you may not be able to measure things exactly the same way as what you're measuring today. So what's the next best approximation? Again, thinking about, Orient, and it'll still give you information, right? And then you go through it, and then you test, and then you see if actually that was getting you where you were today, or close enough or not, and then you go to the next on the list if that's not the case, and you iterate through that. So it's intuitive enough. The point really is to not get stuck in an analysis paralysis point in the observe, because that is what organizations do a lot. We're used to figuring stuff out and wanting to know everything and just get the next bit of information or the next information from our tech vendor or watching what our competitors are doing before we act. But there is so much that you can do, and this is a kind of a way to think about starting to do that. Well, that's all very well, but it's a bit conceptual. So I'm just going to take you through 4 examples of actual marketing cases and how you can then use this, and some of which we are actually working with some of our clients. So the first one is retargeting for search. So I create audiences in GA4 based on observed behavior, and then I push those into search ads. So I'm worried that with cookies, third-party cookies going away, the match there is going to reduce the size of those audiences significantly. So, okay, that's my concern, and reach is audience size is kind of what I'm interested in looking at. So what can I do? Well, all right, I start thinking about different potential solutions to that, and think about, well, uploaded audience lists. We just talked about earlier about user-provided data. where there is that match, and lookalike segments seem like they could probably help in this case. Fine. So, I design my test, and then I'm going to choose customer match and lookalike segments as my actual tools. And my KPI we've already discussed. It's going to be audience size. I use Audience Builder to understand that, to measure that, and then I go through that loop and understand whether that is still giving me, without anything having changed today and having to wait for something to happen to me, whether that is going to give me audience sizes that I can target on that are still comparable to the ones I have today. And if they don't, then I'm going to go on to the next strategy, or I'm going to complement that with something else because I know now that the gap is X instead of just knowing that there's going to be a hole. Or it might turn out that actually it looks really good. So that's one example. The next example is similar, but has a different outcome, if you will. It's still retargeting. It's still behavioral. But in this case, I'm looking at apps and web, and I'm creating my own segments, stitching users together with my own identifier in a CDP. And I'm creating segments based on lifetime value and high propensity to purchase. And then I'm using those and pushing those across all my channels. And obviously those are cookie-based, and that's how I'm doing the matching across different marketing channels. And of course I'm worried that's going to go away. So again, I'm worried about reach. Ultimately I'm worried about ROAS, but I'm worried about reach in the immediate instance. So and I start thinking about, well, okay, what can I do? I've got 70% of my web users are on Chrome. I could be using the protected audiences API. I could also be, like before, using uploaded audiences, or I have identifiable users. And so then I start thinking, well, what do I actually need to do? I think the API sounds like the way to go, right? So in the Orient phase, I do some estimations of that, and I think that that's probably going to be the most fruitful. So then I start thinking about that, and I realize that in order to do that, I need to have the segment. That's fine, I have that. But I also need to provide the signal in real time at the time of transaction. And I don't have that today because I've just been pushing audiences to retarget. So I'm going to have to make some architectural changes to be able to make that signal available where the user is matched. And so that now tells me, okay, before I do anything else, I need to go and do a feasibility study to understand what that's going to look like, what that's going to cost. And so you can imagine different scenarios where actually I go through that and it's more than I want to budget for today. So I'm actually going to switch tactic and I'm going to actually test on uploaded lists instead. Uploaded audiences. And I do that, and maybe I come through the test, and it's not giving me the results I want. Okay, now I go back to the beginning, and I am going to make the investment to make the signal available so that I can now use the protected audiences API. But I've gone through a loop, and I know a lot more, about what I'm ready to trade off, even though nothing has changed yet in the environment outside of me. So that's that. We move to a third example, and this is more on interest-based targeting, right? So now I'm using DV360 with the affinity groups that are there to create or to specify. I'm upper funnel now. I'm trying to create awareness amongst people that might have an interest in my product. And my worry is now that when cookies go away, the way that those affinity groups are created in DV360 is going to get affected. They're going to get a lot less, they're going to get a lot more sparse. There's going to be less behavioral data informing them, and maybe they're not going to be as valuable to me. And so I'm going to spend money on the same thing. They'll still be available, but my ROAS might really come down now because they're just not as granular. They're not as targeted to what I think, what I want. Okay, so what can I do here? Well, in this case, I notice in the observation phase, and I look at everything that my users, in this case, are roughly split 50-50 on Safari and Chrome. And Safari has been doing this, of course, now for 3 years or so. So why don't I then test the idea of saying, again, without even trying a new tactic, I'm just going to segment now. I'm going to create a campaign that is targeting the same affinity groups in DV360, but targeted only to Safari, and then another one that's targeted only identical to Chrome. And I want to measure ROAS, but I can't really do that because the way Safari treats the conversion is going to be different because they've deprecated the cookie. So I'm going to have to scale that back, and maybe I'm going to now look at clicks, conversions, my CTR, sorry. And so that's not exactly what I want, but it's a good proxy. And if I can't measure ROAS directly, at least I have something that's comparable because I'm doing apples to apples. So I do that, and then I get the results that I get, and that can tell me that actually it's going to be okay because I'm still getting a comparable CTR. There's still assumptions in there around whether it's the right people, clicking or not. But if it's very different, then I know that I'm going to have a drop-off, and I need to iterate again and do something else. And then the last example is on social attribution. So more on the measurement side than the targeting in this case, but I thought it would be worth including this as well. So, I invest a lot in Meta and TikTok, and I use the attribution APIs, Facebook API, and so on, and I rely on their in-platform reporting for campaign effectiveness. And then I use this to measure my ROAS and to report to my management. And I'm really worried that when the third-party cookie goes away, because those are all based on third-party cookie, that the measured ROAS, not necessarily the real one, because the conversion is going to be the same, but what I get back in my reports is going to be a lot lower, and I'm going to look really bad in terms of that spend. So what do I do? Okay, so I start looking at the observe phase, and what do I start looking at? Well, I also know and realize that, in fact, 20% of my users are using ad blockers, and then I also know that Safari strips the automatically added URL identifiers when you're using private browsing, right? So all of this is compounding my fear of it's going to look like crap in terms of the reports, and it'll look like I'm not good at my job. So, so you've got a couple of ways you can think of this in the Orient phase. What if I now move to a first-party strategy and I start using GA4 as the way I'm going to measure? I can do that by using UTM identifiers or parameters in the URL. Those are not going to get stripped out. I can pass information across channels. And secondly, I've still got to deal with the ad blocker issue, right? So I'm using the Facebook conversion API, but if I start doing the conversion server side, then that should mitigate the ad blocking effect. Okay, great. So and I've got those two tactics, and that's what I decide I'm going to test. And I go ahead and I do a combination of those two, and that's how I can then understand how badly it's going to be impacted. And then what I do with that could be that I understand that there's a conversion factor, a correction factor to the ROAS that I'm now finding and reporting, but I have data to prove that actually it's equivalent to the previous one, because I'm still in a world where there's a cookie, and that hasn't changed. But what's being reported when I look at it in a different way is, well, it might be that in fact it's quite comparable, because it's still getting the majority of the conversions through. So based on that, again, you're going to have different outcomes. You need to go through it again, or in fact, that you've solved that problem. You're going to be okay, and you move on to the next one. So those are just really some scenarios to give you an idea of, and all of those can be done today, without waiting for stuff to happen to you. And in many cases, as you can see, there are steps that need to be taken that you should not be delaying. So what are some takeaways of this? If you think, Michael talked a little bit also in the Q&A about some of the change management aspects. This is, at the end of the day, pretty intuitive. I mean, the Orient stage is really more where some of the difference happens in terms of like a bias for action with imperfect information. But what are some takeaways when you think about how can I apply this in an organization? Well, the first is, as we said several times, accept that you have incomplete information and that information will change. That's just the reality you're in, and you can still move forward despite that. You cannot be waiting for your tech vendor or your media agency or your competitors to give you the clarity that you need before you go and act. You need to be the one that's acting and setting that trail. Kind of linked to that, the difference, I alluded to it a little bit earlier. Complex is not the same as complicated. A complicated problem is one that you can solve. If you have the expertise and you know the inputs, you will have the output. Implementing a CRM system is a complicated problem. It's complicated. It's going to take a long time, a lot of work, a lot of moving pieces, a lot of detail, but you kind of know what you're going to get out the end when you start. Satisfying your customers on a consistent basis is a complex problem. You can do whatever you want, but there are going to be things affecting that, including your competitors and what your customers want. And you can have the best CRM system, but that's a complex problem. And this is a complex problem, and that's why you need to be thinking this way. There is no single solution or best solution. There is only getting closer and closer to better outcomes and continuing to iterate across those. Lean into machine learning. AI is great in the Orient phase to help identify patterns that can help you think about tactics and strategies that you might use in alternative to the ones that you're using today, as well as creating the actual models, which is the more obvious use. And empower a team with high autonomy. Put a team together with legal, privacy, engineering, marketing, a SWAT team that can move quickly, isn't encumbered by your existing process. If you have an annual budget for marketing with quarterly check-ins, this is not going to work because you're going to iterate once a year. You need to empower that team so that they can move quickly and break things, and then that can help you fix them. And finally, shorten that cycle and go around it again and again. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. So we start out targeting and this kind of section for optimization in such a way as to underscore the point that there is no silver bullet, unfortunately. There is no single way that is going to work for every single person in every single strategy in order to be effective given the changes that are happening. So using a framework such as this, observing what it is that you're doing today, observing what the shifts are in the industry, assigning risk to those activities to be able to prioritize where you're really thinking about, and then orienting to understand what options are available. Going through that testing process is going to allow you to see what fits, what works for you, and going through it quickly is going to get you there before third-party cookies are finally gone from Chrome.